That whole.
So much is happening. So obviously, it's all happening. It's been as we get down to years old. And so bringing this recent administration into this one and just the different changes that it's just interesting and trying to stay focused on that.
So excited.
Long time that not a part of my life that I really always had rich.
Those board platform there. It's pretty cool. Take that word, you can take that word.
It's not really mine.
You can exercise authority wherever you go. The grocery store.
Oh, yeah.
How's everyone at work?
I'm sure that would work well.
Yeah. That's the main thing about Washington is you can go just on the it's like, okay, do my users first thing
Next item on the agenda as we share part of our work has to do with structures of meetings involving Act, procedure. Curtis Leonard is here to present information and support for us to know. Curtis.
Good morning, everyone. Saturday morning, open public meeting at ACT in 4 Point. You guys are great. It's really a pleasure to be here. What I hope we can accomplish today, I have information that comes from the law, but we will have a little bit of homework in terms of our role here, and that is there is room within the law to develop protocols as a board governance team as to how you want to operate. Protocols, communication, and we've got pieces of that in place, but I would point out to what extent the law requires you to do certain things, and to what extent you can develop protocols to implement the law. I work with probably around 50 districts or so, consult with many boards, and every board, of course, complies with the law, but they might have different ways of approaching it or different ways of implementing it. So there's some homework there as we have these conversations. It can become a common theme for us as we talk about board governance, and you talk about our team meetings. Where do you want to be? And I think the foundation of this is transparency to the public, transparency, compliance with the law. Those are foundational pieces that we take very seriously. So with that being said, I've got a PowerPoint. At some point, we'll probably figure out another way to do a training other than a PowerPoint. For me, it's just the easiest way to disseminate a lot of legal information and get examples. I will also distribute this so you can have a copy of it as well. Okay? So with that, I want to do a quick introduction about the Open Public Meetings Act and what it means, what different types of meetings are there, what are the exemptions or exceptions, and what is the role for the board in regards to these open public meetings. And so I start off early in the morning quoting straight from an RCW, straight from the law. I promise I won't just read laws for an hour, but it's a good starting point for us. The RCW talks about open public meetings, and it talks about all meetings of a governing body of a public agency shall be in public, and all persons shall be permitted to attend any meeting of the governing body of a public agency, except as otherwise provided in this chapter. So there's a whole lot there. Public can attend. Now, in that, does anyone see here anything about public comment? That everyone gets 3 minutes. Do you see that there? Do we know if it's in the law? It's actually not in the law. The law on Open Public Meetings Act has some guidance, but it's not every detail that you would ever expect. In fact, you'd be interested to know that public comment is not actually required. Of course, we do it, and we've always done it. And if you have public comment, then you have to have rules associated with it. But the law doesn't provide that public comment is required. The point is, the law provides some of the broad strokes, but a lot of the implementation of what we do, our processes are developed by the board. So the idea that we have 3 minutes public comment, the idea that You know, you get the cards up before the director's portion, or you don't have an opportunity to add. I mean, those are all pieces that as a board and as a governance team you can develop, because that's not in the law. Okay? And so, as we think about how we want our meetings to run and our processes and our protocols, those are developed here. And I will tell you, we have a lot of those pieces already in place. Part of it is just understanding, becoming new to the board, understanding what those protocols are, and then understanding that we can, of course, change or reaffirm what we already do. But there's opportunities for us to learn and grow on that. Okay, so that's the basic foundation for us. We're going to pull this apart, look at it, give examples, tell you things not to do. I'm going to pull some cases of boards that have gotten into trouble, and give you some guidance in the next 50 minutes or so, and hopefully this becomes a training that you can rely on and pull from in the future. You're supposed to get this training once every 3 years, and so this will be a refresher course for some, and then for others, your first time here. Okay, so the OPMA applies to all governing bodies and state and local agencies, includes school boards, so obviously we're here because we comply with the OPMA. As I stated before, meetings must be held in public unless law permits a meeting or part of the meeting to be closed. And we're going to get two examples. There are exempt sessions and there are executive sessions. And we're going to talk about this in a second. Just a note, courts and the legislature are not subjected to the OPMA, so they have different rules. We're not going to worry about that, but I find it interesting that they don't have any rules like them. Only to us, okay. We're going to start first with exempt sessions. And early in my career, I had a couple of boards that would get confused about what is an exempt session versus an executive session. In fact, we might be sitting in that back room there, and you might know we're in session and might not have clarity as to whether or not we're in exempt session or executive session. And, you know, I know the superintendent will be very clear as to whether it's an exempt or exec. But I've had boards that have sometimes confused us. And in fact, I've had auditors that have come in and found audit findings because we called one thing an executive session when it should have been exempt and vice versa. So let's first talk about what is an exempt session. What exempt means is the OPMA doesn't apply. And there's really two areas that apply to your board that you will use and will be an exempt session, meaning the OPMA does not apply. You don't need to provide notification to the public. You don't need to provide an agenda. You don't need to provide notes or anything like that or minutes, because they're exempt from the OPMA. The first example is what's called quasi-judicial. Now, whether you know it or not, all of you have participated in a quasi-judicial matter, I believe. I know our board members, Denise and I have. For our new board members, I believe you have as well, or you will here shortly. Quasi-judicial simply means that you are rendering a decision in a quasi-judicial capacity, which means you're almost acting like judge and jury. Okay. So what circumstances could that be? It could be a student discipline hearing that goes to the board. It could be an employee matter in which you're taking evidence and testimony, and you render a decision. Those are examples when you're acting in your quasi-judicial capacity. So think of it this way. You're reaching a decision like a judge or a jury would reach a decision. And there will be opportunities, probably a couple of times a year, where you'll be acting in a quasi-judicial capacity. In those circumstances, it's not an open public meeting. So we don't provide notification. We don't have to do the same things that we would do in an open session or even an executive session. Okay, so you're exempt from the OPMA. And why is that? Well, a lot of what happens in a quasi-judicial proceeding is confidential. I mean, a lot of times you'll be seeing matters that are maybe an employee is appealing a decision, or a student disciplinary hearing in which there's confidential information and you're rendering a decision. In those circumstances, it's confidential information. And it wouldn't be appropriate to have that at open public forum. Because it's embedded in the law, this idea that we want that to be protected. So that's the first one. Like I said, that'll come up. And then the other one is we come into bargaining season. As you all know, we're coming into an open contract. The other example is when we talk about collective bargaining or labor, any labor grievance and mediation proceedings. So if we were talking about collective bargaining, strategies around collective bargaining, setting parameters, dealing with a grievance or an arbitration is maybe the new board members haven't dealt with that, those will come up from time to time. Those are held also in an exempt session. Okay? And so I know in practice, we'll have a situation where we'll do an exempt session from 7 to 7:45, and that's exempt session that's been noted appropriately, and then we'll be an exempt session for portions, so we can kind of ebb and flow a little bit back and forth between exempt and exempt. But those are the two big ones that you will most likely see for exempt. Any questions on that?
When you have an executive session, which we did on an employee, why is that not called a quasi-judicial?
That's a very good question. I would tell you that there's a difference between getting information about an employee situation, executive session, and actually conducting the inquiry as the board. If the board is taking witness statements, taking evidence, much like a court would, quasi-judicial. If you're only receiving information from your staff or your cabinet, executive session. Does that make sense? And when you are acting in a quasi-judicial manner, I will have a script for you. Because as board president, Leslie, you will be calling the meeting to order, you will be going through a script, you will allow one side to provide testimony, you will ask that individual questions, you'll allow the other side to provide testimony, you will ask that person questions. That's different than getting an update on an employee matter from Mariah.
Who has the authority to call that?
And a quasi-judicial, you will have, in your board policy, there are circumstances that mandate board hearings. Student discipline can be appealed from a disciplinary appeals council to the board. Many decisions, employee decisions are appealed to the board, and you'll find those embedded in your board policy. And I can give you examples of that, but there are probably half a dozen that come in from board policy that say there's a hearing in front of the board. A discrimination policy, for example, discrimination has a protocol in which you go through step by step, and one of the last steps is a hearing in front of the board.
Usually it's initiated by the person complaining.
That's correct.
That's what I'm trying to.
Thank you, Denise, for
It's initiated by the
Thank you.
person who is impacted.
It's early in the morning, sometimes I miss the questions.
Just, I mean, how would it, just practically speaking, how would an individual that has this thing, how would they know that they want to call for a quasi-judicial?
So board
Just
procedure, yeah, board procedure will have, like, for example, a discrimination complaint. An individual can make a complaint at the lowest level, which is informal, which is talking to the individual. That's step one.
Right.
Step two is they make an actual formal complaint to the department. So there's actually a complaint made. Superintendent investigates and creates findings. After that, the individual has 30 days to appeal it. And so I would tell you as a matter of course, would your general public just know 500 pages of policies, I have them all memorized? No. And so when an individual comes to the district with a complaint, potentially under discrimination, we give them a copy of the policy. We tell them, here's how you file a complaint. And if they need help, we can provide assistance, but it's laid out in that policy about what their steps are in order to access that.
I don't want to belabor this, you have a long presentation. It just appears to me that the average citizen, a 15-page reading of that, I'm not sure that they would even know, unless they went to legal help, to even know that that was part of their right to call it in front of the board. I'm just curious.
I would tell you, it's typically the culminating step in a process, and so the public doesn't have the right to automatically have a hearing in the board on any issue.
Right.
And so it's not like, well, I want to be heard by the board, I get a hearing. It's typically one of the last steps.
No,
in the
I heard that, but
process.
I'm just saying, I think they probably quit before they even got that.
Sure.
Just a comment.
Okay. Okay, so those are exempt sessions. We do need to understand too, what is a meeting? You know, here we are here, the board's here. This is a meeting, but there's sometimes getting confusions about what is a meeting. You're on email together, communicating back and forth. We're not physically in the same location. Is that a meeting? We're at the WASC conference afterwards having dinner. Is that a meeting? And there's a lot of questions about what is a meeting. Again, if you are quote unquote meeting, it needs to be open to the public. A meeting occurs with a collective intent to meet. A majority of the board members of the governing body collectively transact with the governing body's official business. Okay? One important consideration is it doesn't have to call a meeting. You can call it could be a retreat or a workshop or a study session, synonymous with a meeting. I will tell you this, where there is more than a quorum gathered together, there is a potential for it to be a meeting. And that's why we have these guidelines, because even informal conversations, via email, informal get-togethers where you're discussing, and then all of a sudden someone mentions, what are we going to do about that elementary school? You potentially could be conducting a meeting even though the public isn't there, and that potentially could be a violation. We're going to put more of a finer point on this. But I wanted to just kind of broaden your understanding of what might be a meeting.
So
It might be more than just gavel, we're here, all five of us, that's a meeting. There could be other circumstances that could be considered. Yes, Leslie?
So if I go to a Rotary auction fundraiser and there's 3 other board members there, do we have to call that a meeting?
Okay, so let's talk about the circumstance. The public is watching, and let's say the 3 of you are in the back, and you huddle around, you start having a conversation, and you're just making small talk. And then all of a sudden, someone says, you hear that board presentation on the elementary school, what are we going to do about that?
It's gonna happen.
Do you see how dangerous that gets?
It could happen.
And I think appearances matter. One, there's actual compliance with the law. So I would, as a board, you need to self-police if there's a conversation that's happening like that. It's incumbent upon the board to say, oh, we can't talk business. Also, there's the appearance of impropriety. I've had circumstances where the board didn't meet, but they would have dinner, and they would go to a back room and work at a restaurant. And the public would walk by, and they would see the board there, really behind closed doors, and it looked like they were having a meeting. Now, they were just having fun, and they weren't conducting business, but there was the appearance. Okay? So in that circumstance, Leslie, you are at the Rotary event, I would expect that you're not conducting business. Now, you can make small talk, you can talk about your community, you can talk about schools generally, but you're not conducting business. Meaning anything that potentially, and we'll get to examples of what it means to conduct business. And I'll put a finer point on that. But you as a board need to be ready to potentially say, you know, let's not talk business, let's keep it to non-business topics. Okay? A meeting is certainly considered a meeting if action is taken. An action would be a resolution of some sort or a vote. I mean, that certainly is an action. Physical presence is not required, meaning there could be circumstances where a meeting could be conducted via email, and that's something I really want to talk about here in a second. Could happen via phone. One important clarification is a meeting doesn't happen if there's not a quorum. And so there might be opportunities, for example, if you have a subcommittee where only 2 board members are present. That's not considered a meeting because it's not a quorum. You obviously need 3 board members to conduct business. And there can be opportunities where in your protocols, updates are given to boards individually, or board members individually as opposed to 3 or more. That's usually a safe way to operate. Both action and final action are subjected to the OPMA, and I don't want to get too much into this, just know if the board's taking action or a vote or making a collective decision, there's not really a fundamental difference between action and final action, according to the law. So what could action be? So this is what you do, and this is what, if you're doing any of these things, this is considered action, and it's done collectively, it's done in open session. Receipt of public testimony certainly would be one, with the exception of quasi-judicial, where that would be done in exec session. Certain deliberations, discussions, considerations, reviews, evaluations, and final actions. Now I'm going to get to executive sessions in a second because there could be discussions and considerations and evaluations that happen in executive sessions. Those are a little bit different. And I'm going to give you a couple examples as to how you balance some of these pieces happening in executive session and some of these pieces happening in open session. Okay? And I'll give you some examples here in a second once we get over the executive session portion. Final action. Again, just reading from the law, I apologize, it's early in the morning, but that's a collective position or negative decision or an actual vote by a majority of board members. Secret ballots are really not allowed. Boards sometimes can get into trouble too within deliberation, and we're trying to figure out, the example I give from the law here in a second, from some cases, is boards in executive session considering hiring a superintendent. And their executive session, you can consider the application for a public employment in executive session. The actual decision whether to hire the superintendent, where does that need to be? In public. Now, the board wanted to know how everyone was leaning, and they thought, well, let's just take a secret ballot now in executive session and see how everyone's leaning. So they distributed papers, and everyone wrote yes or no, depending upon how they were viewing the candidates. And they felt like they were appropriately within their means to do so. But what happened? They had taken a vote by secret ballot in executive session, which was a violation. Okay? And so, as you think about that example, deliberating about a candidate or evaluating the candidate for public employment versus reaching a decision, there's a line there. And as you get more experience, you're going to start identifying and realizing there's a line there. And even in executive session, there might be circumstances for a board or your attorney or your superintendent to say, oh, we can't make that decision yet. We need to make sure that decision in open public session. Okay. Deliberations potentially are okay. Evaluating the candidates are okay. But actually making the decision has to be done in open session. And that could be in regards to a lot of different topics. It could be in regards to hiring a superintendent, extending a superintendent's contract. Many decisions that have to be done in open public should be done and should be voted on in open public, even though we're discussing it in executive session. Okay? So that's a line that maybe seems very like a fine line, but as we get through this and you work through it, you'll start identifying that line cleaner and cleaner. Okay? All right. Discussion might be allowed in executive session, but action must be taken in open session. That's that line, and probably one of the hardest areas for us to get a handle on. But that's the piece that I want you to be aware of. All right, so this was an example. I told you I was going to give you some cases. Riveting stuff here. Miller versus Tacoma. I like that it doesn't say Kent. I don't like Kent School District cases, just so you know. It's my bias thing. I don't like establishing law, district. Okay. So what happened in this case in 1999? Balloting by a city council member when meeting in executive session to evaluate the qualifications for applicants for appointment with the planning commission violates the OPMA. So it's that example I gave you previously. The council is balloting to achieve a consensus for a candidate for appointment to the commission and was beyond the scope of the action that they might take in executive session. The secret ballot was illegal, even though it took a final vote of the appointed in an open session. That's that kind of line I wanted you to be with. Okay, so anytime we're doing a ballot, anytime we're trying to figure out where everyone is. Now, could you have a conversation with your colleague one-on-one about a matter and how they're feeling? Technically, yes, that's not a meeting. You can have a conversation with a colleague or a member of the board member, 1v1, about any outcome. That wouldn't be in violation of the OPMA because it's not a quorum. It's when the bodies together make a collective decision that we need to be aware of this. Does that make sense?
But you have to avoid serial meetings.
Yeah, I mean, seriously,
So you can't,
yeah,
I can't talk to Denise and then say, oh, Leah, I talked to Denise and she said that.
yeah,
I mean, that's what we learned at WASTA,
yeah.
this training at WASTA. I know that 3 of us went through all this training at WASTA too. So that's what I learned there.
Good, yeah, so, and that's also email as well, so you can look at temporally whether or not you're not even at the same location or even during at the same time. Just, if you're doing what you're talking about, Michelle, where you're trying to get everyone's input 1v1, and it's really like still a collective decision, I would argue that's still a meeting. Because you're still trying to
It's a
get
serial meeting.
It's a serial meeting. So certainly, but a one-to-one conversation, just you and a board member, it's not a forum by itself in isolation, without any other action, wouldn't be considered a meeting by itself.
Could you repeat that, Jim?
So if you're just having a conversation with a board member, and it's not a quorum, it's technically not a meeting. I think the distinction that.
I get that, but what if you're trying to understand where other board members are
Okay.
going, one by one?
Yeah, I get
And not
concerned.
sharing what the others said to you.
Yeah, I get concerned if it's a surrogate to having a meeting, like you're attempting to go 1v1 to get everyone's
Yeah.
input. And instead of doing it all together in a public meeting, you're just doing it separately. You're just taking that time component and you're still kind of having a meeting. And so you're going to Michelle, you're going to Maya, and you're getting everyone's input. And, you know, other than us being there at the same time location, you're doing the exact same thing. You're just spreading it out. Technically a meeting. Now, a one-to-one conversation where you just have to have a conversation with board members is not part of a bigger agenda to try to get everybody on the same page. It's not really also a fine line.
So, can I say the
Yeah.
emails that come out, they're copying every board member.
Yes.
That's also saying what an individual feels
Yeah.
about a subject. So, how is that?
Let's talk about emails, because this is potentially an area that can be a big issue for OPMA. There's a couple pieces I want to clarify here. The first caveat is just to exercise extreme caution when sending out emails. Discussing agency business via email with a quorum is likely considered a meeting. And this idea of replying all, I know if you work in your jobs, the reply all can be a very dangerous thing. The convenience of a reply all, but there could be certain circumstances where a reply all could put us in a circumstance where maybe we're spending to respond to the superintendent, to reply all, the entire board. There can be a risk of indeed potentially having to be email even though we're not at the same location. Now, caveat is if you're just getting information, a passive receipt of emails is not considered a meeting. An agenda item is sent to you or something sent to you, it's just a passive receipt of email, that's not considered action. But the OPMA would reply to any forum in which you're gathered together virtually. Text message chains, Facebook, social media platforms, any social media platform that you can envision, potentially where you're gathering and discussing, I think you should avoid because of the potential of a meeting that could occur. Okay. Now, I will say, before we get there, let's talk a little bit about emails because I know there can be protocols and there's questions posed to me whether or not forwarding an email to the entire board, it's a passive receipt, although technically not a violation. What's my advice on that? I think this is one of the areas where the law gives us guidance, but the board can develop and the superintendent can develop your protocols as to how you want to act. I'm concerned anytime an email is sent to the entire board. I'm concerned about reply all. And so I would caution you as you put your protocols together to just be very mindful that what you communicate via email, even though you're not in the room together, potentially could be a meeting. Even if it's, your input doesn't appear to be like a vote, but collectively expressing opinions or, hey, I want your input on this, Michelle, what do you think? And it's all being sent via email, you're in a meeting. And you violate
Even
it.
if, so I'm thinking about like, let's say an email comes out saying, we're trying to plan a date.
Yeah.
So if email comes out to all board members saying, can you let me know if you're available these dates? That needs to be considered if you reply all. That, even though it's not a discussion, is trying to determine a date to meet, that would still be considered a violation.
How have we done that before? When you're trying to get schedules?
We just reply to Karen, we just typically reply
Yeah.
to
Let's
Karen.
clean that up.
Or the president.
President
Yeah,
sends
Yeah.
an email.
It's a protocol piece where, you have a figurehead or you have Karen who's providing that information. That's likely, I'm not as concerned about that. It's more, procedural and kind of, you're trying to get everyone together as opposed to making a substantive decision. I think scheduling the meetings, there needs to be a way to do that. But I would certainly get away from an email thread where every board member's on it, you're all replying, because the threat could be if more information is provided than required above and beyond what the open requires.
Curtis, I want to guess the discussion in recent past to newest board formation has been the use of social electronic platforms like Google, and that was the question.
Yeah, OPMA, believe it or not, doesn't mention doodle polls. It hasn't gotten up to speed yet. A lot of the cases we're talking about is probably still talking about faxes and other things. But the concept still remains. I think doodle could potentially be engaging. And so I would look for alternatives to get that information.
Okay, so that said, we all have calendars. If we all shared our calendars and just knew that, you know, like Wednesdays is when we typically meet, but just every other Wednesday. So it's like, if on a Wednesday we knew we had something that we were going to go to, we could just post it, and then Karen could just see our calendars and just know whether we were available or not, because we could block it out. It would be some more work on the back end for each director, but you know, in a matter of efficiency, if Karen just, you know, set a meeting schedule, if we've been good about blocking out, you know, our Wednesdays, then whether, if we're not available when it's not a regular board meeting, then ostensibly she could just quickly know, oh, we couldn't have a quorum.
I think it'd be a lot to ask Karen to manage 6, 7.
No, not that she would manage the calendar. We would be responsible for blocking out our own time. So if it's like,
But
oh,
if she's looking at it, though, she's managing 7 calendars. So she'd be looking at our calendars to see if it's blocked out.
no, the way Outlook calendar worked, you would just set up a meeting and go to invite people, and you could, as you went to invite them, you'd see that they weren't available.
Right. and
It's
that's-
just a
you have to look at-
suggestion.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that's kind of looking at 7 people's availability on their calendars.
But if we're trying to avoid OPMA, it's just a suggestion.
Sure.
I was just curious, so between meeting schedules and communication, just for clarity, just calendar questions, is that, how is that relative to community violations that we were asking for?
I'm just saying if that could avoid these, reply all to Karen if you're available, then it's just like if she could just, you know, open a meeting and go, oh, I see that, you know, 2 of our board directors are blocked out, or they're going to, you know, STEAM night at such and such a school, so we couldn't have an executive session at that night because they're busy. You know,
I understand, I want to make sure I get clarity, because our current practice is, just so everyone's on the same page, Karen will send, say their STEAM night at school on Thursday. Karen will send an email, please reply to me if you are planning to attend.
Right.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
typically that's-
I'm just when we're talking about these, you know,
Sure. I
potentially
appreciate
serial
the
meetings,
suggestion.
it's
Yeah.
just, it's another suggestion that I just didn't know if that would be just another option to just make it so that there's no potential that we could accidentally reply all or anything like that.
I think under the OPMA, there are options, and that's part of what I showed in the very beginning is the law doesn't provide the guidance as to how you implement it. So I think that's really important that the superintendent's governance team kind of implement how you want. It sounds like your system's working. But listen, if there's tweaks that can be made in ways that are more efficient, that comply with the OPMA, you can certainly explore those. Maybe not today, but another
Right.
one. Okay.
I have a direct question on this. When we're going in to have a board meeting, because it's a special board meeting called, and we have met in executive session to kind of go over what we're going to do. And we're waiting for a statement that the board was going to put together for that meeting. It's part of the agenda. It goes out and I reply, others reply to Karen or Dr. Watts. And I'm coming into a regular meeting in the door, and I'm being told that at that point, most of the board members don't want that statement read. And at that moment, I have to make a statement, write a statement that's some line and I'm hurrying to give and write in 5 minutes before we're going to go into a special session. It appears to me that it's hard, that you have to have more time on all these things than rushing it through, because I had no idea that we were going to change the agenda of what we were going to read until 5:15. And then I wrote it, and I showed it to the people who were there, and said, is this okay? And then, of course, in my caucus, and thank you, Maya, we didn't vote on it or anything. scratching out the part that says the board, and we can't have it.
Yeah, there could be opportunities if you're appropriately convened in executive session. I wasn't involved in this one, so I don't know what the underlying issue. If you're appropriately convened in executive session, you're more free to talk about those issues and you're more prepared in an executive session beforehand. So I would expect that would probably provide a little bit more time as opposed to walking in the door that you would in your executive session but prepared and ready to go.
Well, I mean, in that particular circumstance, it's not knowing that everybody hadn't, not trying to go against OPM meetings, but I had no idea how they felt about this.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That is, it's a hard one.
That's the,
Yeah, how do we, you raised a really good point that I think all of us, how do we, when required, or if required, to come up with a collective board statement? How do we create that without doing it? I mean, it seems to me we'd have to do it in open public session to create a board statement. We would have to meet openly and publicly to discuss creating a board statement. And then there's resolutions as well, so like the resolution that says the board supports the levy that we all voted on, which is essentially, to me, a board statement too. And I don't understand how those are created as well. And ostensibly, if I'm voting on something, whether I said, yes, I'm agreeing that this is speaking for my constituents, because that's who I represent, so my board statement, I've got to filter all that too. So I don't understand how, without violating OPMA, we can create a board statement of any shape or form.
I'll give you an example of how mine work. I will tell you it takes time. It takes time. And so it would have to potentially be done over multiple meetings. And maybe in one meeting it's a discussion piece, and you get an open public meeting, discussions of the board, and you get it. And you leave that meeting feeling like collectively we understand. And then maybe board president comes back with a statement.
Okay.
And then at a separate meeting, after allowing ample opportunity, it comes forward again. So those are examples that might take a little bit more time in planning, but my general rule would be that work can be done in open session. There's no reason why it can't.
Right, so let me get this straight. So it could work where we would have a work session, probably, have a work session, and we would all talk about, we need to make a statement about such and such, and what would you like in the statement? And then one person, typically board president, would compile those, take notes, compile those ideas, and then create a statement that then we would have another work session in public where we would review it, make any other suggestions. That would be the appropriate way, not,
Correct, and eventually
yeah,
go to vote,
Yeah.
and it doesn't have to be board president, and
Uh-huh.
certainly you could delegate that to staff, I think
Okay.
there could be other ways of doing it, but you've got the fundamental piece of it that needs to be done in public.
okay, yeah, because that is my big.
So do I hear you saying that you can't do these things on the fly? That everything, even though we wanted to act really quickly to take care of this employee, that we can't be throwing this out there and expecting it all to come together?
And that's the key, because the reality is in that executive session, you and we talked about responding quickly. And so unfortunately, when we talk about responding quickly, that's what happens. So that was our decision that we made, and that's what happened. And so not that it's a bad one, I'm just saying we have to understand that as a board, we want to do things like that there are some challenges that you have to move quickly, which is what we decided to do.
So I'm going to push us ahead a little bit. Time flies when you're having fun. I know. Great questions. I think they're all relevant. Certainly, if we need more time, I want to make sure the board feels comfortable with these concepts, but you're asking great questions. One piece I want to kind of hammer on a little bit more is in regards to, this can come up quite a bit. An email is sent to you, and let's say it's sent to all board members separately from a community member asking the board to take a position on an employment matter. So you all get a copy of the meeting email that's sent to all. How should the board respond? Should the board respond? Should the board make a collective decision to respond to the community member? And I know individually you probably feel a responsibility to get back to this community member on this issue. But can we see in our previous slides about conducting business via email and an email being sent to all of you asking for a collective decision, do we see at least there could be potential, not just OPMA issues, but like, we don't necessarily want 5 different answers from 5 different board members. But there needs to be some protocols in terms of how we're gonna respond to this. Generally, my boards have the board president be the spokesperson in regards to communication protocols and sending out responses. But I think we need to be a little bit careful in the circumstance because you could be under OPMA, because there could be potentially business you need email. And also, I would want us to collectively at least not be sending 5 different opinions or positions on this matter to the community that potentially could be different, okay?
Well, on something like this specific instance, I think policy requires us, on an employment matter, it requires us to send it directly to the superintendent if he wasn't involved. Because employment matters are his purview, but we can be aware and we can ask for outcomes and things like that. But I thought policy says that something like that we would make sure the superintendent knew, because that would be under his purview.
That is correct, and I think our response would be, if you did need to respond, it would be, thanks for bringing this to my attention, I'll report it to the board members. That type of response, as opposed to what you've identified would be problematic, going out and attempting to solve the issue or provide more than we're able to provide.
But Chris, if they're asking for our opinion and position on it, that's different, because let's say the employment matter has been decided, and then you get an email from the community saying, do you agree with this? I'm concerned about this decision, that. So then that's different. So that, I think that's what this is. So then what I do is, so I always respond, but I respond myself. I don't respond via as speaking for the board. But I think we have to be careful because, we can respond, but we really can't say you're right. That should have been handled very differently, or you know what I'm saying? So I think that's the guidance that probably should come from this, to say what can we say or how should we respond to it? Should we, and I think that's the conversation that kind of needs to happen.
And I think too, with your communication protocols, less an OPMA issue, but more, do we want diverse voices, separate voices, and of course, you're electedly, locally elected, you have the ability to have your own voice, but having a communication protocol to know how is that being disseminated, when are you expressing opinions as an individual, and when are you potentially speaking on behalf of the board? Because this asks just for the board members to take a position, which could be, like you said, Denise, acting as an individual. But at times, it appears that a board director will respond, and it looks like they're responding on behalf of the board. And that's somehow the collective position of the board. And we need to be very, very careful, because that potentially could, 1, violate protocols of conduct of the president, and 2, potentially violate OPMA. Or we could have 5 people trying to act on behalf of the board with 5 different positions, none of which have been collectively decided. So there's some distinctions there.
So is that in the wording?
It can be in the wording, and Denise gave a appropriate example. Certainly you don't lose your right to give your opinion as a community member, but I would want you to express your opinion as a spokesperson for the board or a collective decision of the board.
Right.
And I want you to be very careful on that. I will tell you that my general course is I would be careful with making statements. You're a board member. People view you as a spokesperson for an entity. I would be very, very careful in your communications. I would want to make sure I'm on the same page with my colleagues. I would want to make sure I'm deliberate in my communications and not when it's communicating today is too easy. I would be very deliberate in my communications. All right, traveling. I'm just going to go quickly over some slides quickly. Traveling and gathering, a WASA conference, a community event where you're all there, not to prohibit you from being there together. We already talked about this. Just be careful in your communications and the appearance of your communications. If you're in a room separately and it looks like you're conducting a meeting. But if you're having drinks and just socializing, that by itself is not considered a meeting. Some slides on regular meetings. Our regular meetings are recurring meetings posted online with an agenda within 24 hours. Special meetings have certain 24-hour notice requirements, including time, place, and business to be conducted, provided to members of the governing body. Those are the requirements to conduct a special meeting. Emergency special meetings are very rare, And really, I want you to focus on when are these appropriate. Injury and damage to personal property, okay? And does not include an example from the school district conducting an emergency meeting to discuss a strike response was not considered a circumstance that would give rise to emergency. It's really something that could lead to injury or damage to personal property, an earthquake, a hurricane, those types of events, acts that potentially could result in harm to others. Okay, executive sessions. Remember we talked about exempt sessions at the beginning. Executive sessions are when we are behind closed doors for a stated purpose. The grounds are merely construed, meaning we want to be very careful that we're not just saying, I've seen sometimes boards say it's just personnel, any personnel matters, or just real estate. As you actually look at the law, it's very specific as to what it is you can conduct and what business you can conduct in that executive session. For example, real estate, it's not just real estate. Just talking about real estate is not enough to be an executive session. It's really consider the selection or site or acquisition of real estate, or consider minimum offering price for sale of real estate. That's very specific. Employee matters, personnel matters. It's not that broad. It's more to receive and evaluate complaints or charges against a public employee, or to evaluate qualifications for an applicant for public employment. And then, of course, potential litigation is the big one. Litigation that's specifically threatened, reasonably believed may be commenced, or public knowledge regarding discussion may result in adverse legal consequences. This case right here from Port of Vancouver just says, discussions in executive session about the sale or lease of real estate is limited to really talking about the price, general discussion about context. Some of that might be done in open session. And so this is just an example, and we can have our business folks kind of work this through, as I haven't been in a lot of those executive sessions, but it's to demonstrate the narrowly construed component of how this works, setting the price, whereas general conversations about real estate generally would be done in open session. For an executive session, for legal, you need to have an attorney present. So just because you're talking about legal matters isn't enough. You either have an attorney present or an attorney on the phone. And you can only discuss the matters that were contained in that announcement. This is the example I gave you before. Action taken by executive session to approve a settlement. So you're in executive session and you are appropriately discussing the fact that we might settle a legal matter. The actual approval of that has to be done, much like the approval of the superintendent contract, or other that has to be done in open session. Okay, again, that fine line we kind of established earlier. An important piece here is your role as a board member and the things you learn in the executive session are confidential. Okay, and there is in fact a judicial or a code of ethics for municipal officers in which you all, when you take your oath of office and when you understand your role, you can't go ahead and disseminate the information that you've got in the executive session. And that's a really, really important point. So the fact that you have confidential information about employee matters, confidential information about the sale of real estate, the price of real estate, you wouldn't obviously be able to go out and share with the public, guess what, we're going to sell that property for $1 million, okay, get a load of this. That wouldn't be appropriate. Also, it wouldn't be appropriate to share some of the legal matters. There really is, as the attorney, there's attorney-client privilege, and as I advise the board, the conversations we have in private are protected, and there can be a waiver of that privilege. You waive that privilege if you share that information and you disseminate it. It means you don't believe that that privilege is important. And if you're out there sharing information that's attorney-client privilege information, and there's a legal waiver, then now that privilege is gone, and you can be forced to testify. And so that just goes to show how important it is to keep that information confidential when you get an executive session.
So Chris,
Yeah.
bringing that up in an email, expressing your views, basically is divulging what happened in an executive session.
I would be very careful. Everything, now an email in and of itself is not,
Well, it's open to the public, those.
It can be.
emails, so.
an email could still be attorney-client privilege. Let's say afterwards, board president emails me that's still attorney-client privilege, and there could be circumstances, but I think you're showing really an important point here, which is communicating via email, especially if that's disseminated to the public in some form or fashion. Be a little too fast to loose, and emails can be forwarded before you know it. I've seen those emails go up. Even though at the end of the day, if the public asks for all more emails, I don't have to give all of them if they discuss it. For example, communication.
But I understand, but if it's
Exactly.
going with the board members, other board members.
It potentially can be. You are correct.
Can you explain that so I get it in my mind? Would you?
Yeah,
Is
if
some-
anything we discussed in executive session, that a discussion is happening after the fact via an email, and we're not copying Curtis, but you're sending it to the board as a whole, even though we're saying do not reply all, that information is out there. And it's discussed publicly via email, whatever. it
Within
is.
ourselves, okay, that's.
Right, but it's
okay,
open to
I
the
got it.
public, so.
So yes. Wrapping up here, just a couple more slides, and you certainly we can have these work sessions to really discuss more, and I appreciate your attention to these important matters, but a couple more items here. I said at the outset, public participation is not guaranteed. It's not embedded in the OPMA. Of course, is an important part of what we do. The OPMA does not require that. Board can restrict the time allowed for public comment, which we put to 3 minutes. I know I'm sometimes the bad guy trying to enforce that. Leslie, as we work together, I work with the president to kind of, and I get it's 3 minutes and we don't want to cut somebody off right at 3 minutes. But we have to have some rules, and we have to have some expectations about participation and timing. We want to hear from everybody. And if everyone goes over 6 minutes to 10 minutes, it really becomes cumbersome. And so as you establish your role as president and you feel comfortable with how you want to approach that as a board, I would just say there needs to be some order in regards to that, how that's implemented, because it's not fair if some people are allowed to extend and other people are not. It makes for some difficult presentation of that list. So it's just something I want you to consider.
I totally understand that. I'm wondering if you only have 3 people testifying, and I mean, if you have a whole room full, I get that, you've got to be very strict, but I mean,
Yeah.
there's only 3 people and they're going to go for maybe a minute or so. I mean, is that what a board decides, that could be a potential?
It's up to the board's
Read the room?
discretion, and really to the board president. I would tell you it's a content neutral restriction. I would want it to be enforced uniformly, so if you're going to allow one to go over 1 minute, I wouldn't want the person that's saying things that make you feel uncomfortable to then cut them off. It really needs to be a content neutral restriction. And so for me, the cleanest thing is to have a rule and stick to it, but I understand. If you're wanting to extend and you're not, and someone's having, there's no one back to back, you're feeling like it's 30 seconds over, and you're not enforcing, I can understand. I'm not gonna be the one to stand up and shut them down. I'm reticent to do that. Really, that should be coming from the dais. I can provide assistance. Certainly, when we've had 200 people ready to comment, we really need to be on.
Oh, I get that, but I'm saying, it looks, there's nobody in the room and these people
Understand.
waiting for the whole thing. To me, that's not very welcoming to your constituents.
I understand.
That they can't have a little bit more time to say what they want.
I'll defer to the board and how you want to approach that. You can also put content neutral restrictions on public comments. I want to be a little bit careful with this. I generally don't like shutting down public comment, be it positive or negative. I generally want the public to be able to. We do say we want to not include names. That's okay. But I will tell you, I'm reticent. If we're going to allow comment praising board members and praising staff, on the flip end, you're going to have to allow the negative because you can't come to content. So if we're going to have that not mention names, it really needs to be uniform. It's just something to think about. I really don't, you've not seen me, I will enforce the time, but I really haven't enforced the content as much because I worry about it. Last one, I only put this because it's never come up in this meeting, but it's come up in other meetings that I've attended to. Participation in the meeting is not a right, it's a privilege, and as a board, we expect the quorum. There have been circumstances, I recall a meeting that was a cowbell, and and members of the public will meet in Cowbell. We really are expected to meet and exercise the forum so everyone can be heard. And if members of the public are disruptive or make further contact with the meeting infeasible or preventing us from doing our business, that's not acceptable. And we can't have that person removed. That's never happened in the history that I've seen, and I would be reluctant to do that. But just understand that our meetings, we have rules, we have expectations, and much like the classroom, we have classroom management, we expect people to behave. And that comes from the dais, that comes from our staff to expect that level of decorum. And if it's not being followed, we can take appropriate action if necessary.
And to be clear, I think we discussed any one of us on the dais can speak up, not just board president. And so that's one thing I was not always cognizant of what's happening around me. And there was a mention that any board member that spoke.
Correct.
And so I'm thinking about this because there are times when there's like chatter happening in the audience and we really can't hear because of some of the conversations, and then also audience members commenting or making comments during our meetings. And so that's something where we will be able to speak and say.
Correct.
Okay.
Normally that will come from board president line, you're correct, anyone can have that role. Last item that I'll share is a governing body does not have the authority to ban video or sound recording of the meeting unless this is required to be open to the public, and they regulate recording only to the extent there's an order. And so people can record. The exception would be here, executive sessions cannot be recorded. Obviously, non-meetings in this state is a two-party consent state, and so private conversations or conversations that you're having with someone else and the public's recording, and it's not a meeting, they don't have that right. Even in your quasi-judicial meetings or other meetings, if an individual wants to record a meeting and it's not an open public meeting or an consent meeting, it would require the consent of the participants in order to be recorded. That's what the law is in the state, and recording someone without their permission can actually do this either. So it's something that we take, that we consider very important. But those meetings in the public can be recorded, certainly we're obviously recording ourselves.
So there's after our meeting's over and we're done and we gavel out, any recording after that would need to be permitted if someone.
Yeah, that would fall under the general statute in regards to recording conversations, which you can't record someone without their consent and that would be consent.
If you have a open public meeting listed and people are denied presence by security not being allowed to go in and televise that or take videos of it, whatever you want to call it, you cannot change that rule until you officially from the dais change that description of that meeting to being closed, right?
Correct. I would be very, very cautious of any time we're talking to people attendance at a public meeting or not allowed to be recorded. I would be concerned.
But you have to remember the definition of an open public meeting and who its legal entities in. So committee meetings are not necessarily subject to the open public meeting laws.
But if they were advertised as an open public meeting.
Yeah,
how does
so-
that work?
So I get that you're talking about a very specific example, one from our past, which we've advised on. And we can get into that more, but what we advised at the time is whether or not that committee meeting was acting at the discretion of the board, whether it was an open public meeting or whether it was a closed meeting. The board at the time made the decision that they wanted those meetings to be closed. Despite what the history was, that's what the board collectively decided. And so as a result, those meetings were closed to the public, and that's what the board instituted going forward.
I understand that they're up into the date. I mean, I have these dates in my head that constituents are asking me. And it was an open public meeting when they were refused to go in the door. Following a few days later, it was then decided it was to be closed.
I would just,
So how does that work?
yeah, I'm pretty pragmatic. I would tell you that the board can revisit its decision, and there were things that came up that the caused the board to want to do that.
No, I understand that part of it. But I mean, if it's all advertised in one day and not taking the proper procedure to change that, and in between that, people are refused to go at the door, to me, it just seems like that's not quite right.
It was an anomaly, I would tell you, and I would hope, I'm hopeful that we put pieces of